It's Wednesday, June 29th, and someone in the West Wing finally says Trump knew. We start here. A 26-year-old staffer comes forward to say what no one else has, that Donald Trump wanted to march into the Capitol with armed men.
I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me.
With little pushback so far, this testimony just implicated the former president in an attempted coup. We've seen the dangers of crossing the border, but we've never seen anything like this.
The floor of the trailer was covered with dead bodies.
50 people have been found dead in a truck in Texas. And there are already more than a dozen states where abortions are halted, but not necessarily the states you expected.
Earlier laws, like in Wisconsin and Michigan, aren't trigger laws. They're more like zombie laws.
What's next for the law where you live? From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Brad Milkey. Perhaps the most fundamental question about the events of last January 6th has been, what did former President Donald Trump expect to go down?
Be there, he instructed them. Will be wild.
We knew he was fully on board with false conspiracy theories about voter fraud. We knew he supported this bizarre legal theory that his own vice president could toss out election results from states, as if Al Gore could have just declared himself president 20 years ago. But the big question here is, when he was speaking that day outside the White House, did he think he was just speaking to rowdy supporters, or did he think he was sending them to the Capitol to initiate a violent coup?
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. And we're probably not going to be cheering so much for some of them.
Well, on Monday afternoon, the House Select Committee on January 6th made a surprise announcement. They said their next big hearing was happening in less than 24 hours. Short notice, and they wouldn't reveal who their witness was, signaling whoever it was had sensitive information. Well, yesterday afternoon, as the hearing gavelled into session, Cassidy Hutchinson sat down. She was once the advisor to one of the most powerful men in the White House, but she refused to stay silent about what she says she witnessed on January 6th. Let's go straight to ABC's chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, who is in the Capitol right now. And John, can you just break this down? Why was this testimony so significant?
Because she was there, Brad. This is testimony from inside the West Wing on January 6th. She, as the principal aide to Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, her position in the White House, her physical position, was right down the hall from the Oval Office.
Between the vice president's office, Ms. Kirshner's office, and the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson, is this an accurate depiction of where you were located?
It's accurate. It's a lot smaller than it looks.
And she was there through the entirety of the day on January 6th. She, in fact, the only time she left the White House was when she was in the presidential motorcade to go to the president's speech in the Ellipse. So this is the kind of eyewitness account that this committee needs. Before the cameras, live testimony telling an incredible story.
Yeah, take us through that story, because it starts a few days even before January 6th, and then it continues through the day, right?
Really, the beginning of this, in some ways, was January 2nd. This is when Rudy Giuliani was at the White House for a meeting with Mark Meadows, and when the meeting is over, it's Cassidy Hutchinson who walks him out of the White House to his car.
I remember looking at him and saying, Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, we're going to the Capitol. It's going to be great. The president's going to be there. He's going to look powerful.
She goes back into the White House and she goes to see her boss, Mark Meadows, and recounts the conversation with Giuliani.
That evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared.
In a really poignant bit of testimony, she says that Meadows has a really worried expression and warns her that January 6th is going to be a tough day.
He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, there's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know, things might get real bad on January 6th.
So that's January 2nd, but fast forward to January 6th, she recounts what the president was doing, concerns about his speech being too incendiary. She recounts warnings that were coming into the White House in the morning of January 6th about weapons being in the crowd outside, concerns about violence.
White males, brown cowboy boots, They had Glock-style pistols in their waistband.
And the president's disregard for those concerns, and Mark Meadows' disregard for those concerns.
He wanted it full, and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons.
The story that really caps it off is that the president, Donald Trump, he told his supporters that he was going to go to the Capitol with them. He didn't. We know that. We know it didn't happen. But what we didn't know is that he really wanted to go, and the Secret Service stopped him.
The president had very strong, a very angry response to that.
She recounts a story of seeing the lead Secret Service agent and the deputy chief of staff, a guy named Tony Ornato, who, by the way, is also a Secret Service agent, seeing them just after Trump gets back to the White House after his speech.
The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel.
And yes, lunging towards the steering wheel with one hand and lunging towards his lead Secret Service agent with the other, infuriated, and he's ordering them to go, and they will not take him because of the obvious security concerns.
Well, now we're actually hearing from a source that the Secret Service will be pushing back against this idea that Trump assaulted anyone or that he was actually trying to take the wheel. But John, even before I heard that, I kind of wondered if that might not back up the president's versions of events, right? Like there were people saying he actually didn't have the guts to show up. It certainly sounds like he wanted to be there, and this would make you think that he doesn't think there's going to be some violent riot that he's about to be caught in the middle of, right? So besides this episode being jaw-dropping, what does it actually add to the conversation here?
First of all, he also, according to Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony, knew about the concerns of weapons being in the crowd and actually asked the magnetometers to be removed.
You know, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here.
So he knew that this was a potentially dangerous crowd, but a dangerous crowd that was going to protect him, not hurt him.
Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, "Please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen."
I think what this shows is that in his mind, he saw January 6th and the joint session of Congress, which was going to certify his defeat as president and certify Joe Biden's status as president-elect. He saw this as the moment that he was going to stop it all, and he wanted to be there and to direct it. Yes, it's almost as if what she's describing is the president wanting to personally take part in what can only be described in her testimony as a coup.
Wow, so you look at it through that lens, and the story that's being told is of a president who does not want this peaceful transition to happen. He knows there are armed men out there who will try to help him, and he says, I want to go there and lead these men myself if that means obstructing this official proceeding, which, of course, if that's true, if that's what the intent all was, that would be a crime. Jonathan Karl at the Capitol on some of the most significant testimony we have heard since these events. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Brad.
Next up on Start Here, the smuggling trade has surged, and now so is the death toll, a tragedy in Texas after the break.
With so much at stake in our world right now, we wanted to thank you for your trust and for making ABC News America's #1 news.
And thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues, The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
National parks are incredibly safe places, but crime will happen.
Hey, my wife has fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now.
I was shocked.
Something's not right.
They were creating the perfect Mormon family. And then I fell in love with my friend. Yeah, I'm like stupidly in love with her. Leaving the church was leaving who I was. The lesbian ex-Mormon story is not something that's been shared very much, but I feel like our story needs to be told. Nobody tells you when you're Mormon is that there actually is another way.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
One of the most disturbing global news stories of the last few years has been the number of migrants who were killed on their way from poorer countries to wealthier ones, of sunken ferry boats and rafts, overloaded by people trying to make their way across, say, the Mediterranean.
Fleeing because we were afraid in our countries, even of our countries, afraid of torture or afraid of being killed.
The fact that these deaths have continued actually shows you just how desperate these migrants are. They know the risks and they squeeze together anyway, hoping they can escape wherever they are. We have never seen something that deadly on an American border until maybe this week.
We've got an 18-wheeler. Looks to be about 60 people that are inside. Looks like quite a few of them are already deceased.
On Monday night, we began getting reports that a tractor trailer, an 18-wheeler, was found in San Antonio, Texas, which was filled with people trying to make it across the border into the U.S. Several in those tractor trailer were dead, but it was unclear how many. Overnight, that number rose from 1 dozen to 2 dozen to now at least 50 people dead. ABC's chief national correspondent Matt Gutman has been reporting on the immigration crisis for years. He's made his way to the scene. What do you see in there, Matt?
Right now, there's nothing on this lonely road in the southwest of San Antonio, Brad. There was that tractor trailer, but Homeland Security Investigations, which is the investigative body, has removed it. And now it's just this lonely road with a horrific past.
Migrants seeking refuge is always a humanitarian crisis, but tonight we are dealing with a horrific human tragedy.
At 5:51 local time on Monday, there was a call to 911. There's a truck full of people. Most of them seem to be dead. Law enforcement got there within 9-10 minutes.
The floor of the trailer was covered with dead bodies. So it was a pretty rough scene that the officers walked into.
They saw something that nobody here had ever seen before. Nobody in the United States in the history of smuggling has ever seen across the border. A tractor trailer, a semi-truck, filled with bodies.
The officers had to separate some of the deceased, trying to find who might be still alive.
They couldn't tell who was alive and who was dead because even the survivors were so destroyed by heat stroke and dehydration that they couldn't talk initially.
Your kidneys stop, your liver stops, your heart is overworked, your brain can't work, and you basically are cooking in that environment.
They knew that something was very wrong because as they approached that 18-wheeler, there were bodies outside. People who had managed to get out because the door had been opened and managed to crawl or walk just a few yards and then it collapsed on the road.
We put a monitor on every single one of those people to make sure that there were no signs of life. And
just to be 100%
Just
sure.
to be 100% sure. And there was no signs of life with any of them.
There were prayer cards in Spanish on the floor of the truck and on the ground outside of it. And as they started counting the bodies, more and more, and right now there are at least 51, but because even the survivors were so badly sickened by heat stroke, their organs have failed and they are clinging to life. I was told by the emergency doctor there on scene that they were in extremely critical condition, and including in the survivors were adolescents and children.
So was this just a terrible accident, I guess? involving a smuggler and, negligence on behalf of whoever was doing the smuggling? Or, like, we know cartels, violent cartels, have been taking over this trade. Do we know how they died or why they died?
We know how they died. They died from being in a locked compartment, an 18-wheeler semi-trailer in the back with no air conditioning and no food and no water.
That truck has no air circulating. It's hyper insulated. So all the body heat, all the heat that's being generated inside that truck stays in the truck, just like a thermos model. And it just makes it an oven.
It was 103 degrees in San Antonio, and there was no air in there. And so they watched each other die over a period of hours. And at some point, the driver abandoned the vehicle. An eyewitness saw him leave the vehicle, wondered what that was all about. They got to the vehicle. Obviously, they saw what was inside and then called for help.
It was a horrific scene, something I'll never forget. And it'll stick with us forever.
Brad, I've been talking to first responders, the first two EMS physicians on scene, the chief of San Antonio Fire, and what they can't get out of their minds and out of their nostrils is the smell of what they say was meat tenderizer, which they believe was meant to mask the smell of the bodies. So, yes, negligence, but also something far more insidious.
Yeah. Is this a one-off incident in the minds of investigators, or does this say something about the broader situation at the border right now?
Well, May was the busiest the border has ever been, with 240,000 apprehensions. And that means that smugglers are doing massive business, right? They are bringing people across in numbers we haven't seen before in this country, and we've seen a lot.
The border is closed, which is in part why you see people trying to make this dangerous journey.
They are packing those migrants into these trucks in huge numbers. And the lead HSI investigator here in San Antonio told me it makes it so much more dangerous for those migrants. The same amount of space, but many more people, and there's a rush to get people from the border into the heart of the U.S. or heart of Texas, where they can be transported in smaller vehicles elsewhere. But getting them away from the border is the hardest part and the most dangerous part, and people are dying.
Far too many lives have been lost to this dangerous journey. We will continue to take action to disrupt human smuggling networks, which have no regard for lives.
This is one that they happened to catch only because it was abandoned on the side of a road. And when I spoke to the fire chief and the police chief and the investigator, they say, how many other trucks slip by that nobody knows about? How many other people are dead that we don't know about?
Well, and I remember speaking to ABC's Maria Villarreal a little while ago about how Title 42, this Trump-era COVID policy that's still in effect, that basically says you are not even allowed to start your application process for asylum if you show up here, basically sends a signal to a lot of folks, you might as well try to go underground, right? Like, presenting yourself to an authority figure here is no longer of any use to you. So you wonder if we might see even more human smuggling there at the border. In the meantime, as early as this morning, the Supreme Court could release its opinion on the so-called Remain in Mexico policy. Matt Gutman in San Antonio. Tragic story. Thank you so much for reporting it out.
Thanks, Brad.
We're just about 5 days into this new era of American life where Roe v. Wade no longer applies, where abortion is no longer a fundamental right if a state doesn't want it to be.
I feel disrespected. I feel like my country doesn't care about me. I know that they're willing to let me die instead of make my own decisions.
Despite the sense of finality for a lot of states who said abortion would be immediately outlawed, well, some courts have come back in the last couple days saying not so fast.
Utah and Louisiana have temporarily blocked the trigger law from taking effect, saying the states are unprepared for such a significant change.
And as a result, it's only become more confusing for many women. So let's check in with ABC's legal analyst, Kate Shaw, who's been following all this. Kate, can you just draw me a map of abortion restrictions right now? Like, where are there the complete bans? Where are the almost complete bans? And what does all this mean in the near term?
Brad, I will try, but I will tell you that the landscape is changing quickly, and so it's actually a little hard to get your head around the math at any given moment. But I think the current numbers are something like 13 states. Then there are a couple of states in which courts have issued temporary restraining orders stopping total bans from going into effect. So at least for a couple of weeks in a state like, say, Texas, that would like to totally prohibit abortion, that total prohibition is on hold until a hearing can happen in July. And then there are a couple of other states that are right now grappling in the courts with the question of whether pre-Roe bans, some of which date back to as far as the 1840s, have basically zombie-like come back to life in the wake of Roe and can be enforced, or will be subject to renewed legal challenge and might actually be invalidated. So that's a complicated answer, but that's basically where we are.
Wait, so these are states where, like, I think Wisconsin, and I'm looking at Michigan is the other. These are states that might not want to ban abortion, but all their abortion laws are basically predicated on Roe v. Wade, and that means, what, you just go back to something from back in the day?
That's basically right, Brad. So you had these trigger laws that we've all heard about that were written specifically to go into force if Roe is overturned. But then these earlier laws, like in Wisconsin and Michigan, aren't trigger laws. They're more like zombie laws, right? They were no longer valid post-Roe, but the state legislatures never bothered to pass anything, either, passing a trigger law or repealing the earlier laws. So their status is actually quite unclear.
I don't think that a law that was written before the Civil War or before women secured the right to vote should be used to dictate these intimate decisions on reproductive health.
And so, politicians, both in the legislature, attorneys general, governors, local prosecutors, are basically, positioning themselves to make arguments in court, either that these laws are enforceable or that they are unenforceable. And so that's basically where we are. Trigger laws, pre-Roe laws, and then questions whether states will pass new laws, either restricting abortion or in some cases actually seeking to further protect and facilitate abortion.
And let's talk about that, because we've talked about 26 states seem like they will eventually outlaw abortion in most forms. But that leaves 24 other states. You got these blue states that are trying to add constitutional amendments and codifying laws. Does that do anything? Like, what will come in those states?
Oh, absolutely. I think both for citizens of those states and potentially those from other states, I think these laws could have real impact. So states like Connecticut are, looking to protect not only residents of that state and doctors in that state, but also doctors who might perform abortions on individuals from out of state, where those home states of patients might seek to prevent doctors from providing care or even to impose penalties on Connecticut doctors for providing care.
This law says to people across the country, essentially, Texas, don't mess with Connecticut.
And actually, one thing, Brad, to say, on the 26 states that have or will soon have, very restrictive laws or total bans, all the Supreme Court said in the Dobbs case overruling Roe was that the federal Constitution didn't prevent states from enforcing bans. But states have their own constitutions, and some of them have rights provisions that go further than the federal Constitution. Some of them explicitly protect things like sex equality, family formation, privacy, right? None of those
Even
things
like in a state like whatever, Utah or something, that could apply there, and Utah can't enforce the ban it wants to put in.
Well, that's what advocates in Utah are arguing, that the Utah Constitution invalidates the Utah prohibition. And that's a totally separate question. Utah courts aren't bound by what the U.S. Supreme Court has said about the federal Constitution. And so that is an important kind of next frontier in these battles over, the right to access abortion.
What are some of the other effects then of all this legal confusion? What's the effect of that on real people? Like CVS and Rite Aid recently said they are limiting how much Plan B, how much morning after contraceptive they're able to sell to people because, not because it's illegal, but because everyone's trying to buy it in bulk all of a sudden.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I think a couple of things, Brad. One is, where you have this much legal uncertainty, like in the states we were just talking about, it will inevitably create a chilling effect for doctors and providers. Even if they're ultimately vindicated in their state, there is a right to continue providing abortions. There's going to be concern about incurring legal risk in doing that, at least in the period where the law seems to be in this much flux. I mean, the other thing with respect to pharmacies, say, I think that is really an illustration of how far-reaching the effects of the overturning of Roe really are. Even if we're talking about Plan B, which, is still fully legal, you're going to be impacted if you want to buy some by this decision, even if you live in a state that continues to protect abortion. patients from other states are going to be flooding your state, and that could lead to more wait times and less access to even protected care in your state. So I really think this is a decision that's going to have effects, in every corner of the country.
All right, Kate Shaw, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad.
And one last thing. When I was growing up, my parents would always tell me not to futz with the thermostat. You're going to cost us money, they said. Well, now I've got to make sure my parents aren't running any Bed Bath & Beyond stores. Later today, Bed Bath & Beyond is supposed to release its quarterly earnings, and in preparation for that, several investment firms did what they do. They did their homework. And after visiting several BB&Bs, a report from Bank of America says they witnessed many stores trying to save money by just turning off the air conditioning.
Is Bed Bath & Beyond really turning off in-store air conditioning to save money?
Back in 2015, Bed Bath & Beyond stock was climbing toward its all-time high. Broad City was doing bits about how much time people could spend in there.
They moved the fans. Good call. I was going to say something, but I didn't want to step on anyone's toes, because, I don't work here.
But as of this morning, its stock price has sunk from $70 to less than $7 a share. Bank of America says it's not just pinching pennies on the air conditioning, it's also cutting hours and hiring fewer workers who presumably aren't all doing secret handshakes with Abby.
Abby, you come here, you don't come find me in Flatware.
Now, Bed Bath & Beyond says no air conditioning directive came from corporate, meaning this could be individual stores trying to improve their bottom lines. It also shines a light on how much supply chain issues have decimated certain retailers.
I just bought us some new sheets at Bed Bath & Beyond.
Oh, boy, I hope you stayed away from that Beyond section.
But customer traffic at Target and Walmart are holding steady, while sweaty customers are apparently leaving BB&B in droves. I used to live near a Bed Bath & Beyond in Manhattan, and the busiest week was when the college kids were moving into their dorms nearby, because all of a sudden, you're looking for a can opener, but you got all these moms and dads shuffling around looking for, the best 3-foot rug money could buy. More on all these stories at abcnews.com or the ABC News app. I'm Brad Milkey. See you tomorrow.